Hey everyone, it's Alex and welcome to the Marvel Snap Decks of the Week. This week we're doing things a little differently because, well, we have a ton of games being played in Deadpool's Diner and very few games being played in Standard Ranked. So as a result, we have very little statistical confidence in the information we're being given for Ranked, but a ton of statistical confidence for what we have in Deadpool's Diner. So this week's top 10 is not going to utilize cube rate because, well, there's no cubes in Deadpool's Diner. So if you're looking to get to King Eitri still, which I know a lot of you still are, we got the top 10 decks here, and of course they will translate into Standard Ranked as well. Another thing worth noting, I just released a brand new video on my Marvel Rivals channel called The Rivals Strategist, which is all about the Marvel Snap cards and heroes that I would love to see in Marvel Rivals. So if you love Marvel Snap and you're interested in Marvel Rivals, I'm going to leave a link in the description and in the pinned comment down below, and even at the end of this video, for you to check out that video. It would mean a lot to me. I put a lot of effort into it, but most importantly, it's about Marvel Snap, a game we love, in Marvel Rivals, a game that's about to come out to a ton of fanfare and excitement. So, married to two a little bit. It's a really fun video. I hope you enjoy it. With that being said, let's get started with deck number 1. And by deck number 1, I mean deck number 10. And that's Thena Pride. I was actually kind of happy to see this deck crack the top 10 again, but it's pretty interesting because it goes to show you that somehow when nerfs happen, the decks that have been impacted can somewhat kind of be like thrown to the wayside despite the fact that they're still good. This is exactly that, and I thought about like not including this because like, okay, it even features Claw, which doesn't really make sense because Claw actually gets a -1. It had been nerfed as well, so it actually got hit twice by this particular deck because when Age of Venom hits it, it goes down to a 3. And obviously the prior deck had Iron Man and Mystique going to 5-4 and 3-4 respectively. Now they're at 3 powers. So like the deck did get notably hit, but it's still running a 59% win rate, and a lot of people are probably just sleeping on it. It's probably very good still. It's not completely soul-shattering like it was in Age of Venom's heyday, but it's still a legit deck. And so you see exactly this. Situations where people kind of like, oh, this card got nerfed, I'm not really going to play it anymore. And you throw a perfectly good deck to the wayside. So when I was doing the statistics analysis and I was seeing this at a 59.1% win rate in Deadpool Diner, I was excited to talk about it again. And we are seeing some interesting tech in the case of like Cosmo and Juggernaut. Those are cards that have kind of been swapped in and out. I do think Cassandra Nova is near required in this deck considering how much Arishem we're seeing out there. But regardless, seeing kind of like a Thena and Kitty Pryde style deck hit the top 10 was a breath of fresh air. I mean, now it is. It wasn't at the time, but we haven't been seeing as much of it lately. Now, going into deck number 9, we do have High Evo, and it's been a while since we've seen a High Evo deck break into the top 10, so it's cool to see Deadpool's Diner at a 59.3% win rate, bringing it back from the dead. I mean, it's a fun deck, and I think that we're going to see some potential for, High Evo making a bit of a splash in the upcoming season with a couple cards that might allow you, I mean, Bruce Banner, you keep floating energy, you give it to the Sunspot, but then all of a sudden you get the Hulk out. I think High Evo might be making a bit of a comeback this next coming season, but in the meantime, we do got a toxin-based deck. Now, this deck, interestingly enough, is not running Ajax, and I feel like Ajax would also be a good addition to this deck. Like, I'm sure that Ajax High Evo is probably a good list to consider playing, but this one here statistically is performing very well. We do have an amazing Ajax deck to talk about too. Don't worry, he's still on the list. But this one here is interesting. If you're a High Evo believer and you've not played in a long time, I think in my testing, because when I saw this deck, I'm like, I actually want to play. I started playing a bunch. It was the Rogue that honestly was doing so much damage to guys. Rogue was hitting Gore. It was hitting Iron Man. It was doing a lot of work. So Rogue feels like an absolute must include here. But generally speaking, the deck performed really well. It felt pretty good. It doesn't feel like it has the high-end capability, like that smash power that some of these other decks have. Because like your high-end is Abomination She-Hulk by surprise event, like basically in a bunch of like debuffing. It doesn't have the Hulk. It doesn't have infinite skip plays or anything like that. So it has a lower ceiling than some of the top performing decks do have. So that's the only thing that kind of holds it back, I believe. But generally speaking, cool to see High Evo back in here, and I know that a lot of people that might be interested in playing something a little different. Look at that, we got 2 decks here, top to bottom, doing some interesting stuff. Then we got Junk. Now, we've seen some Junk, different Junk iterations kind of doing work in the last little bit here, and this is another one that's been doing pretty well in Deadpool's Diner at a 60.2% win rate. It has Red Hulk, has Cannonball, you do have the Dr. Octopus at a 4.8. It's a good list. It's a good list, and obviously the Titania Green Goblin play has the capabilities of completely shutting down a location. It's kind of, I don't want to say sad to see, but obviously White Widow doesn't make these decks anymore because you're kind of revolving around filling their locations, and when you do that, you negate the White Widow effect. But overall, the deck plays really well. I like the Hood into Viper play. You can also Viper in Debris, Rock, stuff like that. You obviously have the Kate Bishop, which often, well, 50% of the time, will give you the Acid Arrow. There's a lot to love about this deck. You have the tech of Shang-Chi, which can generally be very valuable. And in a deck like this, Cannonball does carry his weight because he's often destroying the card that he's displacing. So a really interesting deck. Cool to see it in the top 10 once again. And I find it very exciting when we do like these different style analysis, how different decks tend to rise to the top as opposed to the same ones we keep seeing in kind of like a little bit more of a stale, boring meta. Going to number 7, we do have Wiccan at a 60.4% win rate, so just very marginally better than the other one here. But I like this deck. It does utilize Agent Venom, which has kind of started to prove itself as a better card than perhaps was originally anticipated. Alioth is great here. Copycat's still making some magic happen here. And I do like the addition of Luke Cage Valentina in this deck. You don't see a lot of Valentina out there. You are seeing some like Airsham-based decks here and there, but this is obviously a very good performing deck that utilizes Valentina for the players that might have picked it up, or those that are excited about the series drop that's happening for Valentina. That's awful, but anyways, that's a whole other conversation. What we have here, though, is a pretty decent performing deck. I tend to prefer Wiccan decks with a little more of a top end, but I do like the idea of like Wiccan into Surprise Alioth, or Magneto into Surprise Alioth, because what Magneto can do when I was testing this deck was you can essentially block off locations on turn 5 and allow you to then more reliably play Alioth, knowing that like, hey, like they can't really do much in that location. They're unlikely to play there. And then so Alioth was shut down another lane with initiative. So I do think that's pretty neat. But yeah, so Wiccan's been doing some stuff. Interesting to see Quicksilver, a card that I've still not even Infinity Split because I still don't believe in the card. But here it is, doing work at a 60.4% win rate. As we move on to our next deck here, we do have Helicarrier Discard. There's been a couple different versions of Discard kind of floating around, and this one's been a very good one, a 60.5% win rate in the Deadpool's Diner. It's performing well. I mean, when you got Collector and you hit that Helicarrier and your whole hand fills up, that's pretty exciting. Then you Morbius and you Modok everything. It's kind of crazy, right? It has like this pop-off potential, and it has the Scorn, obviously. Now, what's interesting is you're running both Scorn and Swarm in this deck, which you don't often see very often in some different decks. They often take one or the other, but in this deck, they're playing both. You do have the Activator in Corvus Glaive, which is awesome because if you do happen to get rid of your Helicarrier, that extra energy allows you to kind of play down your hand a little more rapidly, and we know how much extra energy counts. Well, for those that play Airsham at the very least. So the extra energy does make a big difference in this deck. At a 60.5% win rate, it's pretty impressive, and it's nice to see Helicarrier Discard making a bit of a comeback here. I feel like this Deadpool's Diner, like, kind of like analysis is showcasing that a lot of people I think are playing decks that like they're familiar with, and there's a couple budget friendly options here. And it's interesting because what you're getting is a whole different type of list as opposed to just going straight up top down win rate, right? So that's exactly what we're doing, but we're focusing on the Deadpool's Diner with a greater range of ranks as opposed to just infinite, right? So I kind of like to see this stuff. It's kind of refreshing to some degree. Coming in at number 5 has been my favorite kind of deck of the month, and that's Scream. Now, this is a different version of Scream. I'm not playing a version of Scream with Hydration Robert or anything like that, although Hydration Robert does have some synergy with like Kraven and obviously Spider-Man Morales if he happens to move early. But this deck here is a well-performing one. I think Scream is awesome. The only challenge with these decks here is if you don't draw into Kingpin, Kraven, or Scream. And the reason why you run all 3 is because like you need some sort of activator for all the move, or else you're moving cards around for no reason. So like even if you don't draw Scream and you have Kraven, you can still like Polaris into Kraven or Spider-Man into Kraven and try to take value that way. Kingpin does the same thing, obviously. Ideally, you want Kingpin into Scream, then you go Kingpin into Kraven as a backup plan, and then any of the 3 as the final backup plan. But ultimately, the deck is good. Cannonball's interesting in this deck because he's never actually destroying anything, but the displacement effect could be interesting. The reason for this is because you often clog locations with Stegron and with Polaris. That's what I've been trying to do. I always play Kingpin or Kraven in the middle or in the right location so I can repeatedly punch things into those spots, right? And when you do that, you're effectively able to make it so you can clog one, and then when you clog one and you've guaranteed the win there, especially when the fact like Kraven's running up or Scream's running up or Kingpin's running up, you just on turn 6 play Cannonball and knock out their value card and just trade, hopefully, right? And if you don't have initiative, you got to be very wary of Alioth, but then you have Alioth too, and obviously if you have initiative, that works much better. So anyways, a lot of ways to win with this deck. I like it a lot. Scream's been the number 1 deck that I've been playing in Deadpool's Diner this month. Going to number 4, it's cringe, but it is Airsham, 61.4%. Win rate here, it's a very strong one. Now, this deck has a couple different tech options. This one's not running Loki. I did check to see how the Loki version was performing in in Deadpool Diner. It's still doing very good. It's like a 60-something%, like a little lower. And I like to only kind of feature one version of the deck archetype, unless it's like widely different or like both are crushing it, right? But it's still pretty good, the Loki version we talked about prior, but this one here is the latest, highest performing version of Loki. It's running the copycat. I like the Enchantress usage right here. Enchantress is a key component of countering like the Gores and stuff like that. You're seeing a lot of Gore Mystique gameplay, but overall, it's just good. And if you have, like, if you're in a situation where you're against, like, Gore and stuff, you can Shang it, you can Enchantress it, then if you Enchantress it, it's just dead. Like, it just loses all its power. It goes negative, right? It's actually better to Enchantress it from a power perspective than it is to Shang-Chi it, which is ironic, okay? But anyways, a very high-performing deck at 61.4% win rate. Shouldn't surprise you. Airsham has been doing good for some time, despite the fact that most people are beginning to absolutely hate it. We go to number 3 here. Surprise, surprise, it's Surtur. Now, Surtur's play rate has gone down significantly, despite the fact that it's running a 61.5% win rate. It's still an absolutely remarkable deck in this game. It's still a remarkably good card. And the deck, honestly, is almost a carbon copy to some of the first ones that were generated. I mean, I even played the Nico. Nico originally was getting cut. Now it's back in. So, like, this is almost exactly what we were playing on day 1 or 2 of Surtur's release. And sure enough, a month later, after its nerf, it's still performing in the top 3 here of the decks of the week at a 61.5% win rate in Deadpool's Diner. That's legit, right? Like, that is a pretty legitimate performance from Surtur, who has now been nerfed. But even if the nerf, he still gets a 10 power. It discounts Scar, who also got nerfed, right? So there was like this whole deck got like nerfed from multiple avenues here, but still performing very well. So if you have Surtur and you're looking for a deck to continue to climb through Deadpool's Diner, this is definitely going to be one that you can do it in. Going to number 2 here, we're going to go right up to Toxic Ajax. I did kind of hint at it before. Ajax still being a very top contender in the meta, 62% win rate. We had a high evo based Toxic deck, and this one here is using not only Ajax, it's using Anti-Venom and Malekith. Malekith does make this deck here, which does make this one significantly more expensive than the high evo version. But I do think this version is better. In my testing, I felt like this version with Ajax does have a higher high. The high evo deck, well, does a good job debuffing naturally. It doesn't have the height that this deck does. It doesn't like trade effectively vertically the way this deck does. And so I do think this deck is definitely better, and the statistics do back it up as well, despite the fact that this one is definitely more expensive overall. But yeah, you can't deny it. Ajax running a 62% win rate. It's definitely doing good. A surprise play here is Juggernaut to displace a card. I think that's kind of fun too. Hydration Robert making this deck too. Can you believe it? Hydration Robert's making all these decks in the top 10. You love to see it. Stay hydrated, Robert. As we move to our number 1 deck of the week, and a reminder, guys, we're on our way to 100,000 subscribers here. We're trying to get there before the end of 2024. I would appreciate it if you're not subscribed already that you do consider it. And if you are subscribed already, I love you and I appreciate you with all my heart, because you guys are making my dream a reality. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Number 1 deck, it's Moonhawk. Basically what we have here is it's like a mashup of a bunch of different decks here. And this has been like on the periphery of the meta for some time. And now, with Airsham being as popular as it is, with all the changes we've had with the major patch or OTA we had a couple weeks back, it's now this deck's time to shine. A 62.3% win rate according to OneTap. You have the Viper, you have the Hood, you got the Cassandra Nova for the Airshams, you have the Disruption with the Black Widow, and of course the Korg, you got the Dark Hawk. And it's interesting because you also have the Moon Knight, the Proxima. This is like 6 decks slammed. It's like, okay, let's take 2 cards from this deck, 2 cards from this deck, 2 cards from this deck. And then you get this one here. Black Bolt, Stature, Viper, Hood. You have the Cassandra Nova. You got the Korg, the Dark Hawk. You got the Moon Knight, the Proxima. It's kind of funny. And my version of this deck runs Fenris Wolf. But statistically, straight up, right, Fenris Wolf doesn't perform as well. Like, I cut Black Widow for Fenris. That's kind of the way I play a deck like this. So if you have Fenris and you want to cope a little bit, then you can do that. But regardless, guys, this deck's good. I hope you enjoyed this week's top 10. A little different with Deadpool's Diner here. But hey, we saw a lot of fun decks, a lot of new decks. And I like to do that because we got to shake things up every once in a while. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Right here on the screen, guys, as I mentioned prior, I do have that Marvel Rivals channel video that I discussed where I'm going to be talking about the Marvel Snap cards I would love to see in Marvel Rivals. Check it out if you haven't already, and we'll see you on that next one.